Hey, what's good everybody? My name's Alckemy. Today we've got another kind of talking head video where I want to discuss another secret weapon, which is layering, and talk through a process about how to do it. Layering is, I think, one of the biggest weapons or secrets that you can utilize whenever something just isn't quite up to snuff. And I'm going to talk about a few different approaches of how you can achieve that. So if that sounds interesting, I would love it and really appreciate it if you could like the video, support the channel any way that you can, you know the drill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a preset, and we're just going to find some kind of bass, and this is going to make sense here in just a second. And I'm not trying to sell you or anything, but it's just a cool way to be like, hey, here's a cool sound. Because even with a cool sound like this that I spend a lot of time making, sometimes you still need to go the extra mile in order to make it better. So check this out. We've got a bass. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to utilize the pitch bend and find some kind of phrase. So let's also randomize the table. Great. Now within this, we're going to pull up rolling sampler. If you don't know what rolling sampler is, you can get it for 20 bucks from Birds Things. And we don't really have context with this, but we're just going to talk about sprucing up the sound itself. Now don't get me wrong, I think that this bass sounds really cool. I think that it has potential as a fill, which is usually what I design sounds like this for in the first place. But I think that it could be a lot better. So there's different ways that you can do this, especially if you are in either Ableton or Bitwig, because you can either duplicate the sound and create different variations of it. You can also create racks via audio layers. Or group tracks, or whatever, and I'm going to show you both. So first and foremost, I think that I'm going to try to do the most DAW independent thing, and I am going to create a duplicate of this, because if you're talking about layering, there you go, you just layered this. You don't have to worry about this so much. And please stick around to the end of the video, because there's something really important that I want to talk about when it comes into how to not be intimidated by layering and how to actually apply it within your workflow, as opposed to just doing it in context of sound design. Don't feel like you need to sound design and layer right at the beginning, but again, I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. So what we've done now is we've just created a copy of this, and if you play them together, it's going to sound twice as loud for one, right? But we don't really want to do that. And what I would like to do instead is maybe pitch this up an octave and listen to how this sounds against this now. Okay, so on one end, this is kind of crazy, and we don't really need all of the information that, especially if you have a really strong fundamental, is going to pop out. See that? So we don't really need anything below that. Now within this, what I can do is just listen to this a couple of times, and we can change warp modes for one. Okay, that sounds kind of nice. Now what we can do is we can add a fuse compressor or like some kind of OTT or something, and start to make small changes to this layer that's going to make it sound like it's still part of the same sound, but a little bit different. And that's really the goal when it comes into the layering, is you want to make everything seem like it's part of the same world. If you look at video game design, that's an excellent use case for like when people talk about layering and stuff, because there's usually multiple sounds going on at once, right? So if I'm like trying to sound design for a gun, there's multiple things that it's like it's, and you've got like the hand movements, and you have all the physicality to it. But it all needs to seem like it's within the same world. So the best way to do that, like let's say you wanted to just not even do any of the stuff that I just did now, the easiest way to be successful in layering is to turn it down. So really subtle mixing with utilizing this. See, it's now starting to seem like it's a little bit closer. That's just like my go-to if I just want to, put stack sounds on top of each other and whatnot. But we're going to end up doing that after this, because right now I'm just going to try to make this sound a little bit wider. So we can use like a Haas effect. We can use chorus and flanger. I think we're just going to start with a flanger perhaps. And let's take a listen to how this sounds. Cool. And then to make this a little bit easier to mix as well, I'm actually going to do a mid-side split here. And I'm going to take out a lot of the side information, or a lot of the mid information. And then what I can do on the sides is I can apply something like a convolution reverb. And this is just one use case, but this is like, hey, here's a really easy way to layer. And we can just take this here, and this in itself is actually creating a layer now too, right? Because I split it into two different channels. If you look at here on the mids, there's nothing on there. Here on the sides, we've got something else. So I can utilize this now and move this over. Excuse me. Make sure that the clipping is on and adjust this accordingly in order to create another piece of the sound, because we pitched it up and we added stereo effects to it, and now all we need to do is mix it in to where it will, you know, kind of seem like they're part of the same. It's going to make it, what we pretty much did was we put it in a physical space, because now it's not just the sound, it has a room now. So now what we can do is, again, kind of just mix that in and turn it down a little bit versus. And the other thing too is that you can do this as many times as you want. Like maybe perhaps you want to have like a super crazy distortion layer. So what we could perhaps do is just take out everything but the super highs, kind of like so, and we can add something like a saturator. Doesn't matter, any kind of like fuzz distortion or pedal or something you can use if you're in Ableton. And we can solo this, and we can just drive this. So that's not quite enough for me, so maybe we'll go one step further and add some kind of like bit crusher. And as you can tell, I'm pretty fond of the kilohertz stuff, so we can then we can even go one step further and add a ring mod to this if we wanted to. I'm being excessive right now, but I'm just showing you different stuff that you can utilize. There we go. So now we can probably turn this back up a bit. But now we have a nice little crunchy layer that's on top of this. And even though you can't identify the tone anymore, you can identify the movement, right? Because it's like, and sometimes that's why doing it this way can be helpful and important. So now if we try all of these together. Then what you can do is you can group all these together and then process them as a single sound if you want to. So that's one way that you can do that. Now let's say you don't feel like doing that and like layering is really scary. Well, let's try things this way. Let's go ahead and grab, let's just grab an effect. So let's grab something like Pro R2. Okay, so the thing is that you can create a mix like this if you want, but I tend to usually do things this way to where I have a mix at 100%. We go Command G and then we hit, I just actually hit Command D, but you can just hit a layer like this. And now what we have is a dry layer or a wet layer and a dry layer. Leave this one alone and let's just focus on this one for now. What we can do with this is we can, again, take out everything that's on the low end, and we can start to manipulate this reverb and even create, you know, distortion or something like that, maybe even like diss tube culture, and just create a top layer over this that is going to be like really crunchy. Which that sounds pretty cool. Cool, so now maybe we can adjust this and make it a little bit more quiet, or a little bit shorter, sorry. And now you see that this is super loud, so we're pretty much going to end up doing the same thing to where we mix this in. So without this, now we've got all the space that's on top. And we can do this with multiple layers. Let's say we want to add in something that's maybe going to help try to boost the sub. We can add in another layer here. And I'm just going to focus on the low end. And within this, I'm going to kind of Fletcher this and kind of roll this off up top. If you don't know about the Fletcher-Munson curve, you can kind of look that up later at some other point in time. But what we can do is we can start to saturate the low end. And now we've got this really nice chunky bass. And maybe what we can do, in case if we're worried about, you know, phase cancellation or whatever, is we can actually take out the low end of this. And now I inadvertently taught you how to frequency split, because now we're just going to focus on the mids here. And if we solo this, now what we can do is we can process this with different kinds of stuff as well. So we can do something like a chorus and flanger if we wanted to. That sounds really cool. And now we can listen to all these together versus... And the thing with this as well is that maybe this is a little bit much, so what we can do is back off the mix. And then we can use something like a fuse compressor or a saturator or a clipper or something to put everything together. And without this, it sounds like this. Which, this is pretty clean, but it sounds a little dry. It sounds like just, I don't know, a little stale. So by adding some stuff like this, and this is just for an example, right, of just pure sound design, you can layer stuff either by creating racks of effects. The way that people used to do stuff like this back in the day, was, especially with like neuro-based processing, is they would do 3 copies. They would split one into high, middle, and low, like I did on the effect rack, and then they would apply different effects and then have a resampling channel. Thankfully, we live in a digital age that we don't have to do that anymore, or we could just use a rolling sampler or something. But you want to be mindful, because like there's so many different ways to approach this that shouldn't be too scary. And this is the part of the video that I wanted to talk about with this. So right now, I'm purposefully showing you the intention behind how to actually apply effect layering and stuff. But really, when you should be doing this, at least in my opinion, is in the midst of when you are writing your track. And I know that some people say do your sound design outside of, outside of like actual production as much as possible. But the truth of the matter is that no matter how much you try, if you do any kind of sound design whatsoever, you're likely to end up doing a little bit of both. But let me just pull up a track or something. I'm going to pull up, I don't know what to call this. I ended up giving this a name, but let's say like, you're listening to this track and everything is sounding okay, but then you find a moment to where you want something to be a little bit thicker. This is where layering is going to be really helpful, because you already have context of what you're trying to accomplish. So I don't really know of any sounds in here that I would want to layer. Maybe this thing, because I think this is a fill, or actually this is a vocal, I think. So let's just listen and I'll pick one and then we'll do a layering use case. Okay, actually this is a great example. So this is a neuro bass, right? So I've already resampled this, I believe, but we can do it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some reverb to this. So I'm going to go Pro R2 and go like this, add in a dry wet layer. This is going to be at 100%. We're going to turn the ducking off, and I'm going to show you the exact same thing that I did from before and try to move this in context of a song. So I'm just going to listen to this now. Okay, I want this to be a little bit further, a little bit brighter. And then I'm just going to mix this in a little bit and see how that sounds. Cool. So that's one really easy use case. Another thing, especially when you talk about drum design, that I think a lot of people really get caught up in, and it's not a bad thing, but I think that so many people, when it comes into like layering drums and stuff, is like, oh my gosh, I got to do all this, I got to do all this. And you'll notice that on my snares, which I believe is right here, which is right here, just have a fundamental for now. But then you'll notice that on here, I've got different layers in certain cases. So from not this one, but the yellow to the orange, I've got just one extra layer. And sometimes you might see that I might have a different layer, but I kind of just started with like something that has a nice transient. And if I want to layer over something or create a different variation, as opposed to printing it to audio or something, I can just find something else, like literally anything. Let's just find some percussion. Maybe something that's not so tonal. Okay, this will actually work. I know I said something that's not so tonal, but what I can do is create a new track right here and move this upwards, and I can we're going to go a little bit further with this, but I can just place this under here and take out the transient and just kind of fade that in and just use that. And then because I have the placement here, then in theory, I can just say, okay, every first snare on the bar is now going to have something like this, right? And then what I can do after this, we can resample if we want to. Sorry, I don't really want to do that to the song, but just as a means of like, hey, here's an application. Now what I can do is I can actually kind of just mess around with some sound design to this and, you know, utilize like, I'll show you. So the first thing that I want to do is listen to this. Okay, so let's make this more physical by adding a convolution reverb to this. We're going to use this one because it's just, I have access to more sounds that are a little bit more realistic. Let's do a theater stage, doesn't matter. Then we can use a frequency shifter. We can add in a small amount of reverb to this. What do I want to use? Let's use Pro R2. There we go. I'm going to move the frequency shifter over. And then what I'm going to utilize is a really short delay in order to create some kind of like metallic tone. There we go. So now all we have to do is mix this in with the original snare. So I'm going to add some saturation here just to prove a point. So now we've added a layer over this. So that sounds pretty cool too. So what we can do is we can have that on every like half or second bar or something, but we've created essentially a new layer under our percussion. And I know that like I went for something very specific, and I don't really want you to worry so much about what I just did with the layer here because it can be anything. For example, I don't care about that. What I could also do is just take this and copy it into a new track. And then we can do different stuff with this in particular, like stretch it out. And then we can start to implement things like frequency shifting and stuff. And this goes into the tutorial that I just put up about being resourceful and whatnot. But what you should be, did that just quit on me? No, we're still here. But what you should be focused on whenever this is moving and whatnot is like how to create different variations of these sounds. And by resampling and duplicating them, we can end up getting different contexts that might end up sounding cool. So I didn't do much to this, but I just faded it in. So, okay, so that sounds pretty cool, but we might want to turn it down a bit. So, and then we might want to make it just a little bit shorter. So, you know, or we can even like do something really wonky, like adding in another delay and actually using the delay to where it's a little bit off. So maybe triplets here. There we go. So that sounds pretty sick. So there's a couple use cases in how to layer. Don't be afraid of layering. There's also a time and place of when to do it, but I would say like really try not to worry about having the most pristine sounds to start with. If you do start with really strong sounds, it does of course make everything easier, but just know that you can, through the power of layering or even just replacing a sample, focus on the composition and then start to add in the details after your skeleton is done. And I think that will help you find much more success with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. If you don't have that, you know, crazy noisy Cohen sound chi snare that's like, it's okay. Like you can always find that later, or you can find a tail, or you can go and search for pots and pans, and then just add that into the actual snare that you have. Don't really worry so much, at least I don't anymore. I don't really try to be like, I need to design a kick, I need to design a snare, I need to design a bass, I need to design a pad, a lead, a pluck, or whatever, because that puts you into this extremely formal way of making music to where you are only thinking about traditional instrumentation in order to craft your song. And instead, my biggest journey was, how do I find things that are uncanny, things that are organic, but also stuff that you couldn't really identify as a traditional instrument. And if you only have a traditional approach of synthesizing, then a lot of times it's going to pigeonhole you into that front, and everything's going to sound very digital, which is okay. But if you allow yourself to focus on just using all of those contemporary instruments as a starting point, and then get into the elaboration part, that's where you'll start to find really cool sounds that you've never thought about exploring before. So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah, this is another video that I wish I would have had a long time ago. And if you resonate with any of my advice here, then please feel free to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member, where I have masterclasses, or check out the sounds that I have available on alchemy.com. Thanks, everybody. Have an awesome rest of your evening.